When people argue about operating systems, the conversation usually turns emotional very quickly. Windows users talk about compatibility and gaming, Mac OS users talk about polish and ecosystem, and Linux users are often dismissed as hobbyists or extremists. But when you step back from brand loyalty and marketing and look at operating systems as tools designed to serve users, a different picture emerges. Linux is not just an alternative to Windows and Mac OS. In many fundamental ways, it is a better operating system. Not because it looks flashier, or because it has the biggest advertising budget, but because of how it is designed, how it treats the user, and how much control, transparency, and longevity it offers. One of the most important differences starts with ownership. On Windows and Mac OS, you are not really the owner of your operating system. You are a licensed user. Microsoft and Apple decide the direction, the rules, the updates, and often what you are allowed or not allowed to do. With Linux, the operating system belongs to you. It is free software, meaning you have the right to run it, study it, modify it, and share it. This isn't a philosophical footnote. It has real-world consequences. When something changes in Windows or Mac OS that you dislike, your options are limited. You can complain, adapt, or leave. With Linux, the system is shaped by its users and communities, not by shareholders or marketing departments. This ownership translates directly into control. Linux gives you full control over your system, from the kernel to the desktop environment. You decide what runs, what starts at boot, what services are active, and what software is installed. Windows increasingly takes control away from users through forced updates, background services, telemetry, and system components that cannot be removed. Mac OS, while more polished, also restricts user control through locked-down system areas, aggressive security policies, and tight integration with Apple's ecosystem. Linux, by contrast, assumes that the user is competent or at least willing to learn. It does not hide the system from you. It invites you to understand it. Privacy is another major area where Linux stands out. Windows collects extensive telemetry by default, even in professional editions, and disabling it completely is nearly impossible without third-party tools or deep system hacks. Mac OS collects less data than Windows but still communicates regularly with Apple servers, and many features depend on cloud integration. Linux distributions, especially community-driven ones, generally collect little to no data by default. When telemetry exists, it is usually opt-in, transparent, and well-documented. You can inspect exactly what is being sent because the code is open. For users who care about privacy, this alone is a decisive advantage. Security is often misunderstood in discussions about Linux. Many people say Linux is more secure simply because it has fewer users, but that is an oversimplification. Linux is more secure because of its architecture and development model. The permission system is strict by default, separating user space from system space in a clear and consistent way. Software is typically installed from trusted repositories rather than random websites. Updates are centralized and cryptographically signed. Vulnerabilities are discovered and patched in the open, often quickly, because thousands of developers and security researchers can inspect the code. Windows and macOS rely heavily on obscurity and centralized control, which can slow down responses and limit transparency. Stability is another area where Linux consistently outperforms both Windows and macOS, especially over long periods of use. Linux systems are known for running for months or even years without rebooting, especially in server environments, but this stability carries over to the desktop as well. Windows updates are notorious for breaking drivers, causing unexpected reboots, or introducing new bugs. Mac OS updates, while generally smoother, can still break workflows, deprecate software, or slow down older machines. Linux updates tend to be incremental, predictable, and reversible. If something goes wrong, you can often roll back or switch kernels easily. Performance is closely related to stability. Linux is incredibly efficient with system resources. It can run smoothly on hardware that Windows and Mac OS would struggle with or refuse to support at all. This is not just about old computers. It's about efficiency. Linux does not waste CPU cycles and RAM on unnecessary background services, advertisements, or telemetry. You can choose a lightweight desktop environment that uses a fraction of the resources required by Windows or Mac OS, or a full-featured one that still remains responsive. On the same hardware, Linux often feels faster, more responsive, and more consistent. Hardware longevity is a hidden but critical advantage of Linux. Windows and macOS both push users toward hardware upgrades, either explicitly or indirectly. New versions require more resources, drop support for older CPUs, or stop supporting older devices entirely. macOS is especially aggressive in this regard, with Apple regularly cutting off older Macs from new releases. Linux, on the other hand, excels at keeping old hardware useful. Drivers are often maintained for years, sometimes decades. Community support extends the life of devices long after manufacturers have moved on. This makes Linux not only cost-effective but also environmentally friendly. Software management on Linux is fundamentally better than on Windows and Mac OS. Package managers allow you to install, update, and remove software from a central system using a single command or graphical interface. Dependencies are handled automatically. Updates for the operating system and applications happen together. On Windows, software is still largely installed through individual installers, each with its own update mechanism, notifications, and background processes. macOS is better thanks to the App Store and Homebrew, but it still lacks the unified, system-wide approach that Linux has had for decades. Customization is one of Linux's most visible strengths, but it's also one of the most misunderstood. It's not just about changing themes or icons. On Linux, you can choose entirely different desktop paradigms. You can use a traditional desktop, a tiling window manager, a minimalist interface, or something entirely experimental. You can tailor your workflow exactly to how you think and work. Windows and macOS offer limited customization that mostly affects appearance, not behavior. Linux allows you to reshape how you interact with your computer at a fundamental level. Another major advantage is the Linux ecosystem itself. Linux is not a single product. It is a family of distributions, each tailored to different needs and philosophies. If you want something simple and beginner-friendly, it exists. If you want something bleeding edge, highly customizable, or ultra-stable, it exists. Windows and macOS are one-size-fits-all systems. Linux lets you choose an operating system that aligns with your priorities, whether that's stability, innovation, privacy, or minimalism. Cost is an obvious but often underestimated factor. Linux is free, not just in price but in freedom. You don't pay for licenses, subscriptions, or activation keys. You don't need to worry about reinstalling after hardware changes. For individuals, this saves money. For organizations, it can save enormous amounts of money, but more importantly, it removes artificial barriers. You can install Linux on as many machines as you want, experiment freely, and learn without restrictions. Gaming is often cited as a weakness of Linux, but this argument is increasingly outdated. Thanks to technologies like Proton, Steam Play, and Vulkan, thousands of Windows games now run on Linux with little or no performance loss. Many games run better on Linux due to lower overhead and better driver efficiency. While macOS has largely been abandoned by the gaming industry, Linux is actively improving and gaining support. The gap is closing rapidly, and in some areas, Linux is already ahead. Professional software is another common concern, but the reality is more nuanced than people assume. While some proprietary applications are Windows or macOS only, Linux often offers powerful alternatives that are free, open, and professional grade. In many industries, Linux is already dominant behind the scenes. Most servers, supercomputers, cloud platforms, and embedded systems run Linux. Developers often use Linux as their primary environment even when deploying to other platforms. This real-world dominance speaks volumes about Linux's reliability and capability. Learning and growth are often overlooked benefits of using Linux. Linux encourages users to understand their systems rather than treating them as sealed appliances. This knowledge is transferable. Skills learned on Linux apply to servers, cloud environments, networking, and programming. Windows and Mac OS tend to abstract these details away, which can make users dependent on the platform rather than empowered by it. Linux users often become better problem solvers simply because the system allows and encourages exploration. Community support is another area where Linux shines. Instead of relying on corporate support channels, Linux users benefit from vast global communities. Documentation, forums, wikis, and chat rooms are filled with people willing to help, explain, and share knowledge. Problems are discussed openly, and solutions are documented publicly. With Windows and macOS, support often means waiting for official fixes or navigating opaque knowledge bases. Linux support is collaborative and transparent. Ethics and long-term sustainability also matter. Linux is not designed to lock users into ecosystems, push subscriptions, or maximize data collection. It is designed to be useful, adaptable, and enduring. Windows increasingly feels like a service designed to monetize attention and data. macOS is tightly integrated into a hardware ecosystem that prioritizes profit and control. Linux exists outside these pressures, which allows it to focus on technical excellence and user needs rather than business models. Another subtle but important advantage is predictability. Linux changes, but it changes in ways that are generally documented, discussed, and optional. You can stay on a stable release for years if you want, or you can follow the latest developments. Windows and macOS often force paradigm shifts on users, redesign interfaces, remove features, or change workflows with little warning or choice. Linux respects the idea that users depend on their systems and should not be disrupted unnecessarily. Even for everyday tasks like browsing, email, media consumption, and office work, Linux is more than capable. Modern Linux desktops are polished, user-friendly, and visually appealing. They can be as simple or as advanced as you want. The idea that Linux is difficult or ugly is largely based on outdated stereotypes. Today's Linux desktops rival or exceed Windows and macOS in usability, especially once you remove the clutter and restrictions imposed by commercial operating systems. Choosing Linux is not just about switching operating systems. It's about choosing a different relationship with technology. One where you are in control, where your system works for you rather than against you, and where your skills and knowledge grow over time instead of being locked behind walled gardens. In a world where software is increasingly closed, monetized, and controlled, Linux remains a rare example of software that genuinely respects its users. That is why, in the long run, Linux is not just an alternative to Windows and macOS, but a better path forward.